The mess hall at Camp Pendleton was a chaotic symphony of clattering trays, shouting Marines, and the low hum of military chatter. Fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead, casting a sterile glow across long rows of metal tables. PFC Jenna Cross moved through it like a ghost in plain sight, balancing a tray loaded with eggs, toast, and a steaming mug of coffee. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone, not out of fear but by choice. In her world, every glance mattered. Every perception could be a threat. Every motion, even in a place as mundane as a mess hall, required constant vigilance. Jenna had learned early on that appearances were deceiving. At first glance, she was just another Marine. Standard issue uniform, short-cropped hair, and a face that could blend into any formation. But beneath that unassuming exterior was a body trained to move with the precision and speed of a predator. She belonged to one of the military's most secretive special operations units, a cadre of elite soldiers whose missions existed in classified shadows. Her actions, her skills, her very presence were invisible to most, but deadly if underestimated. As she navigated the crowded hall, trays clanging against one another, Jenna's mind cataloged everything. The position of each soldier, the placement of chairs, even the way sunlight glinted off cutlery. It was habitual, unconscious, a muscle memory honed over years of top-tier training. Her senses extended beyond the ordinary, a quiet awareness of potential threats that most Marines could never perceive. Then came the disruption. A tall, broad-shouldered Marine, burly and brimming with the kind of arrogance that only comes with untested bravado, barreled into her path. He didn't even glance her way. His shoulder collided with her arm and her tray tipped slightly. Coffee sloshed dangerously close to the edge. "Hey," Jenna said sharply, her voice steady but carrying a subtle undercurrent of steel. The Marine didn't respond with an apology. Instead, he laughed, a low, mocking sound that drew the attention of several nearby Marines. "Watch where you're going, little girl," he sneered, as if the title itself could diminish her presence. Something in the room shifted. Whispers began to circulate, but mostly unnoticed by Jenna. Her focus remained on him, on the way his stance betrayed ignorance of the force he was about to encounter. He was oblivious to her secret life, to the missions she'd executed under cover, the lives she'd risked and saved, the enemies who wouldn't live long enough to even whisper her name. Her hand brushed the edge of her belt, fingers grazing the corner of a concealed knife holster, small, tactical, lethal. It was a precaution she never needed to use outside of extreme circumstances, and yet tonight she didn't hesitate to let her posture radiate latent power. The Marine's laughter grew louder, a challenge, a test, an invitation he thought he understood. He shoved harder, this time knocking the tray from her hands completely. Food flew across the floor. Eggs splattered, toast slid under tables, coffee puddled across the tiles. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some Marines froze, unsure if they should intervene. Others laughed nervously, caught between camaraderie and the unmistakable tension radiating from Jenna. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. Her eyes locked on his, icy and unyielding, revealing nothing of the storm beneath the calm exterior. "You've made a mistake," she said softly, the tone deceptively calm. A subtle shift in her stance, the tilt of her shoulders, the barely perceptible tightening of her fists communicated more than words ever could. The Marine faltered, if only for a fraction of a second, enough to feel a flicker of unease ripple down his spine. The mess hall held its collective breath. Everyone sensed it, something unspoken, a power lurking beneath her unassuming demeanor. Even the loudest, most confident Marines felt a cold prick of doubt. No one had seen her act yet. No one had heard her speak more than a few words, and yet her presence alone was a warning. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," she said, her voice low, measured, carrying an authority that made even the rowdiest Marine hesitate. The faintest hint of a smirk played at the corner of her mouth, a predator assessing its prey. The Marine tried to recover, to push back, to assert the dominance he thought he owned in this hall, but something in him hesitated. Fear, quick, fleeting, but undeniable, crept into his expression. It was not overt terror, not yet, but it was enough to make his movements clumsy, his bravado faltering. Jenna's gaze didn't waver. She moved forward a fraction, the slightest shift in her stance, enough to communicate readiness without revealing the full extent of her skill. Her training in close-quarters combat, hand-to-hand strikes, and tactical defense was encoded into her every movement. Every step, every gesture was precise. Every inch was controlled. A tray clattered to the floor somewhere behind her, startling a nearby group. The Marine's friends glanced nervously at him, sensing the tension escalating, though none could articulate why. He squared his shoulders, attempting to laugh off his sudden uncertainty, but his eyes betrayed him, darting, calculating, trying to gauge the danger he had unwittingly stepped into. "You don't know me," Jenna said again, a subtle steel threading through her calm. The room seemed to shrink around them, the din of casual conversation replaced by the magnetic pull of impending confrontation. Her fingers brushed the edge of her concealed knife again, not to draw it, not yet, but to remind herself, and perhaps him, of the reality beneath the veneer of civilian normalcy. One wrong move from him could trigger consequences far beyond spilled eggs and coffee, and she had trained for consequences far larger than any mess hall altercation. The Marine's breath hitched slightly. He realized with a creeping dread that this was not a Marine to underestimate. The stories circulating about her unit, the top-secret, off-the-books operations, were true. And yet, even as he processed the realization, he still didn't fully grasp the depth of her lethal precision. Jenna's eyes softened momentarily, just enough to make him think he could recover the situation, that there was still a chance for diplomacy. But the faintest twitch of her jawline, the calculated shift in weight from one foot to the other, told a different story. She could end this without raising her voice, without any theatrics, without a single overt strike. All she needed was the patience to let him falter on his own. The mess hall remained silent, tense. Other Marines shuffled uneasily, some whispering, others avoiding eye contact entirely. They all felt it, a storm contained, a force invisible yet undeniable. Jenna took a deliberate breath, steady, measured, commanding. The Marine's bravado was crumbling, a brittle shield against a force he could neither name nor understand. And in that instant, it became clear. He had stepped into a world he didn't know existed. The room seemed to pulse with anticipation. Every gaze was on her, waiting for the first overt move, waiting for the signal that she might strike. And yet she remained perfectly still, perfectly calm, perfectly in control. The only sound was the distant scrape of chairs, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the low, steady rhythm of her heartbeat, controlled, methodical, like a predator waiting for the right moment. For Jenna, this was nothing new. She had faced threats far deadlier than a brash, overconfident Marine. She had walked into hostile territory where a single misstep meant death. And yet, the principles remained the same: control, observation, and the knowledge that fear is a weapon, sometimes more powerful than any physical strike. The Marine swallowed hard. He realized too late that he had underestimated her completely. The lesson would be burned into his memory forever, though he didn't yet know how far-reaching the consequences could be. Jenna Cross, Marine and secret operator, had already decided the outcome, and the mess hall, once a place of noise and camaraderie, had become a silent arena of tension, respect, and invisible power. And for those who watched, they could sense it: the calm before the storm, the subtle charge in the air. Something extraordinary had just unfolded in plain sight, a demonstration of skill, control, and lethal potential that most would never fully comprehend. The aftermath of the mess hall confrontation hung in the air like a heavy fog. For most Marines, the incident would have been shrugged off by the end of the day: a spilled tray, a shouted apology, and life moving on. But Jenna Cross was no ordinary Marine. Every movement, every glance, and every reaction carried weight far beyond what anyone could perceive. The burly Marine who had shoved her now sat at the far end of the mess hall, his tray untouched, fingers twitching nervously as he picked at his food. His friends avoided eye contact, murmuring in low tones, their usual jokes swallowed by an unspoken awareness that something had shifted. Jenna, however, moved through the mess hall with the ease of someone invisible yet omnipresent. She picked up a discarded napkin from the floor with a casual, fluid motion, not out of necessity, but as if to remind herself that control could be maintained in the smallest details. Every glance in the room felt like a test, and she passed each silently, eyes scanning, nodding, measuring. A lieutenant approached her, stepping carefully around the scattered breakfast debris. His expression was a mix of curiosity and unease. "Cross," he said, lowering his voice, "I heard what happened in the mess hall. Is everything okay?" Jenna's eyes met his, calm, unwavering. "Everything. Under control," she replied smoothly, her tone betraying none of the tension that had gripped the room. She knew what he truly meant. The ripple effect of a single altercation could spread further than any spilled coffee. One wrong word, one misjudged action, and the entire dynamic of the unit could be disrupted. She didn't need permission or validation. Control was inherent, not granted. As the lieutenant nodded and walked away, Jenna's gaze returned to the Marine. He had recovered somewhat, attempting to eat, but his movements were hesitant, deliberate, as if every bite could trigger another confrontation. She allowed herself a fraction of a smirk, barely perceptible. Power was as much psychological as physical, and she had just demonstrated it without lifting a weapon. Whispers spread quickly through the ranks. By mid-morning, the incident had reached the ears of officers, non-commissioned officers, and even the logistics staff. "Did you see Cross?" someone murmured in the barracks. "They say she's from some special operations unit, SEALs or something." The rumor mill churned, fueled by fear and fascination. Jenna remained outwardly unconcerned, though inside, she monitored every reaction, every ripple of curiosity or apprehension. By noon, the Marine who had shoved her was sitting alone near the perimeter of the dining area. His face bore the faintest shadow of humility, a stark contrast to the arrogance he had worn earlier. He watched her from afar, struggling to reconcile the image of the quiet, unassuming PFC with the silent storm he had felt moments before. She walked past him with the casual grace of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once, the echoes of her presence leaving him unsettled. The tension didn't fade. During drill practice that afternoon, Jenna's reputation had already begun to precede her. Other Marines watched her movements closely, noting how she executed exercises with precision, speed, and an almost unnatural control of her body. Even the drill instructors, veterans who had seen countless Marines pass through their programs, raised subtle eyebrows at her form, her fluidity, her ability to maintain focus amid chaos. Something about her presence commanded attention, without demanding it. Meanwhile, the Marine who had struck her fidgeted during drills, his confidence shattered. He attempted to mask his unease with forced smiles and exaggerated motions, but each time their eyes met, a flash of recognition crossed his face. He had miscalculated. He had no idea who she really was, and that ignorance gnawed at him. By late afternoon, the base itself seemed to acknowledge her unspoken authority. In hallways, whispers followed her passage. In the training yard, glances lingered. She moved with purpose but never arrogance. She didn't need to assert dominance. It radiated naturally, a quiet aura that drew respect and subtle fear alike. As evening approached, Jenna found herself in the armory, performing routine maintenance on her personal gear. Each movement was deliberate, precise, a ritual she had perfected over years of missions few would ever know existed. Her hands moved expertly, checking, adjusting, and recalibrating. The armory smelled of oil, metal, and gunpowder, a familiar, comforting scent that grounded her. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. The mess hall incident had been trivial, yet it illuminated the chasm between perception and reality. Most of the Marines she served alongside saw her as another PFC, indistinct and unremarkable. Few could comprehend the layers of training, experience, and lethal capability lying just beneath the surface. One careless shove could have ended far differently had she chosen to escalate. A knock at the armory door interrupted her thoughts. It was Captain Langford, an officer familiar with her unit's operations but not the full extent of her covert capabilities. His eyes were cautious, observing, calculating. "Cross," he said, voice low. "I heard about the mess hall. Any issues we need to address?" Jenna looked up, her expression calm, almost serene. "No issues, sir," she replied smoothly. "Everything resolved." But inside, she recognized the subtle calculation in his gaze. He had seen enough to know she wasn't a typical Marine, and that knowledge carried both opportunity and risk. By nightfall, the barracks were quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the morning. Jenna sat on her bunk, reviewing tactical manuals and mission notes, her mind oscillating between present realities and past operations. Memories surfaced unbidden: covert insertions into hostile territories, high-stakes rescues, silent extractions where lives hung on her split-second decisions. Each memory reinforced a simple truth. In her world, control, precision, and awareness were everything. And anyone who underestimated her, even a seemingly brash, arrogant Marine, would quickly learn the consequences. The Marine who had shoved her earlier paced in his own bunk, replaying the incident again and again. Fear and fascination coiled together inside him. He couldn't understand her. He couldn't predict her. And that realization unsettled him more than any physical threat ever could. Outside, the base settled under the dusky glow of the setting sun. Shadows stretched long and dark across the training fields, echoing the invisible presence Jenna cast. She stood briefly by the window, watching the last of the light fade, a ghost among the ordinary, a force unacknowledged yet undeniable. She had turned a minor act of aggression into a lesson in observation, restraint, and psychological dominance. And the ripple effects of that lesson would last far longer than any spilled food or bruised ego. The day ended, but the story had only begun. Whispered rumors, subtle glances, and the weight of unspoken knowledge would carry the tension forward. Jenna had revealed nothing explicitly, yet everything was clear. She was a Marine to be respected, feared, and never underestimated. And somewhere in the darkness of the barracks, the Marine who had shoved her made a silent vow, not of revenge, but of caution. He had touched a storm he didn't understand, and he would never make the mistake again. Jenna Cross remained calm, collected, unbroken. For her, every interaction was an exercise in control, every glance a test of awareness, every movement a potential message. She was ordinary on the surface, extraordinary beneath it, and the mess hall incident had been merely a prelude. As the base lights dimmed, she allowed herself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The day had been won without a fight, without a display of force, without anyone fully realizing the storm they had encountered. And that was the power of someone who belonged to a secret world, a world where strength was invisible and true skill was never fully seen. The echoes of the mess hall would linger. The Marine would remember, the base would whisper, and Jenna would continue to move through the world like a shadow among soldiers, silent, lethal, untouchable. And in that quiet the suspense remained. If a simple shove could evoke such tension, what would happen when the full depth of her skills was ever revealed? Morning arrived at Camp Pendleton with the clang of reveille, the familiar drone of boots on concrete, and the low hum of Marines stirring into action. The events of the previous day, the mess hall confrontation, still hung in the undercurrent of the base. For most, it was just a strange anecdote, whispered in corridors, repeated with exaggeration. But for the Marines who had been closest to the incident, it was something more. A silent warning, an invisible storm whose intensity none could yet measure. Jenna Cross woke early, as always, her eyes opening to the dim pre-dawn light filtering through the small window of her barracks. Every muscle, every nerve, seemed to awaken simultaneously, tuned to the rhythm of discipline and awareness instilled through years of relentless training. She didn't merely get out of bed. She rose with precision, a controlled grace that spoke volumes of the life she had led behind the veil of ordinary service. Today's schedule was grueling. Obstacle courses, tactical drills, and close-quarters combat exercises. The Marine who had shoved her in the mess hall, the tall, brash figure whose arrogance had caused the disruption, was assigned to the same training group. From the moment he saw her, a ripple of tension passed through him. He had tried to laugh it off yesterday, to play the role of the confident, untouchable soldier. But now, each step toward her felt measured, cautious, as though he could sense the storm beneath her calm exterior. The training yard was alive with movement. Marines sprinting, vaulting, lifting, and crawling. Commands rang out sharply from drill instructors, their whistles piercing the morning air. Jenna moved seamlessly, her form immaculate, her focus unbroken. She didn't need to prove anything. Yet every movement she made, every landing from a jump, every pivot, every deliberate placement of hands and feet, radiated competence that bordered on the uncanny. Her opponent in the drills, the Marine who had struck her, faltered the moment she entered his field of vision. The subtle shift in her posture, the quiet confidence she exuded, caused a tremor of uncertainty. He tried to mask it with exaggerated movements, puffed-up pride, and loud grunts, but even the most casual observer could see the cracks. He was nervous, aware of a force far greater than he had anticipated. The first drill was a close-quarters obstacle course, designed to test endurance, agility, and mental acuity. Marines vaulted walls, scaled ropes, and maneuvered through narrow passageways. Jenna moved like a shadow, silent, efficient, unerring. Every step calculated, every motion precise. She navigated obstacles as though they were extensions of her own body. The Marine who had shoved her struggled behind her, chest heaving, limbs awkward from uncertainty. With each glance at her, he felt the invisible weight of her presence pressing on him. "Cross," a drill instructor barked. "Lead the team through the next segment." Jenna's head lifted slightly, eyes scanning her team. Her voice was calm, authoritative, yet never harsh. "Follow my lead, eyes sharp, every move counts." Her teammates, already aware of her quiet intensity, responded instinctively, synchronizing with her rhythm. The Marine who had shoved her tried to keep pace, but the slightest misstep betrayed his tension. He realized for the first time that physical prowess alone would not bridge the gap between him and someone like Jenna. During the climb up the vertical rope, Jenna's body seemed to defy expectation. Every pull, every push, every controlled swing of her legs displayed strength and coordination honed beyond the typical Marine's experience. Her feet landed lightly, silently, on the platform above, and she turned, surveying the yard with the serene calculation of a predator. The Marine reached the same point moments later, chest heaving, sweat glistening, realizing that his previous assumptions about her capabilities were catastrophically flawed. The drill moved into the hand-to-hand combat segment, a controlled sparring exercise. Jenna paired off with another Marine, not the one from the mess hall, but someone chosen to challenge her reflexes. Within seconds, her movements were fluid and devastatingly precise. Each block, each strike, each maneuver demonstrated control that bordered on artistry. Observers watched in quiet awe, whispering under their breath. This was not just skill, it was mastery. The Marine from the mess hall watched, an uneasy mix of fascination and fear washing over him. He remembered the shove, the casual disrespect, and the subtle, unspoken lesson she had delivered without violence. Now he saw it in motion, how quickly, efficiently, and effortlessly she commanded respect through action alone. It wasn't intimidation, it was presence, a force that could not be challenged without consequences. After the sparring session, the Marines moved into the tactical scenario portion of the day. Simulated urban combat, decision-making under pressure, and situational awareness were paramount. Jenna's team performed seamlessly, moving in coordination, covering angles, communicating silently with subtle gestures and glances. Every movement was calculated, rehearsed, yet executed with a natural fluidity that made it seem instinctive. The Marine who had shoved her tried to follow her lead, but every attempt felt reactive, disjointed. His mind raced, recalling the mess hall incident repeatedly. Each memory amplified his uncertainty. He couldn't predict her, couldn't anticipate her. And every second he lagged behind reinforced the realization that she existed on a different plane of capability. Midway through the tactical scenario, a loud command rang out. "Hold positions, threat incoming." Jenna's team froze instantly, silent, alert. Her eyes swept the simulated battlefield, noting every obstacle, every cover point, every line of sight. The other Marines moved in response, but it was her subtle guidance, small hand signals, slight nods, that orchestrated them into a seamless unit. The Marine who had shoved her froze momentarily, overwhelmed by the efficiency and control he witnessed. A simulated aggressor approached from the flank. Jenna reacted instantly, intercepting the movement, blocking, redirecting, and guiding her team to contain the threat. Every motion precise, decisive, and confident. The Marine tried to mimic her, but hesitation betrayed him. His reactions were slower, clumsier, his confidence waning. For the first time, he fully understood the difference between brute strength and controlled skill. By the end of the day, the training yard had grown quiet. Exhaustion hung over the Marines, bodies slick with sweat, breathing ragged from exertion. Yet Jenna remained composed, her movements precise, her focus unbroken. The Marine who had shoved her avoided her gaze, realizing the depth of skill he had underestimated. The mess hall incident had been minor, but its repercussions were now glaringly clear. In the barracks that evening, whispers circulated again. Stories of her agility, precision, and control had spread. Marines discussed her movements in hushed tones, speculating on her past missions, her training, and her capabilities. None had witnessed the full extent, but all understood that she was not to be underestimated. Jenna sat on her bunk, methodical in her review of the day. She noted every movement, every decision, every reaction, not out of obsession, but as part of a continuous process of self-assessment and improvement. Her world demanded perfection, and even in small, seemingly mundane interactions, discipline and control were paramount. Outside, the Marine who had shoved her sat on his bunk, replaying every moment of the day. He felt a quiet, gnawing fear that he couldn't articulate, a combination of respect, unease, and fascination. He realized that he had glimpsed only the surface of her skill, and that what lay beneath was far more formidable. Jenna's reputation continued to grow, not through words or declarations, but through presence and action. The mess hall incident, the obstacle course, and the tactical drills had combined into a silent, unspoken lesson for everyone who had witnessed it. Strength isn't always loud. Power isn't always visible, and underestimating the wrong Marine could have consequences beyond comprehension. As night fell, Jenna walked to the edge of the base, looking out over the training grounds. The shadows stretched long, dancing over the terrain she had traversed countless times. The day had been challenging, yet controlled. The lessons were clear. Observation, anticipation, and discipline were as vital as physical skill, and those who failed to recognize them would learn the hard way, just as the Marine in the mess hall had. She allowed herself a quiet breath, letting the adrenaline ebb. The storm had been contained today, yet it simmered beneath the surface, a constant presence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for observation, and perhaps new moments where her presence would silently assert itself. And somewhere in the stillness, the Marine who had struck her would remember the lesson. Power is often invisible, skill is often silent, and those who underestimate a shadow may find themselves overpowered without ever understanding why. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the air carrying the faint scent of salt from the nearby coast. The base was alive with the usual cacophony, boots pounding across concrete, drill instructors barking commands, and the low murmur of Marines moving between barracks and training grounds. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of the morning, a subtle tension lingered. Jenna Cross had become more than a name whispered in corridors. She had become an unspoken force that even the most seasoned Marines felt but could not define. The mess hall was again crowded for breakfast. Jenna entered with quiet authority, tray in hand, eyes scanning, nodding, calculating. Even the simplest movements carried meaning. She could sense the mood of the room shift, the way Marines hesitated, the subtle recoil of the Marine who had shoved her. He sat at the far end of a table, hands gripping the edge, a faint flush of embarrassment and fear coloring his cheeks. Whispers traveled fast, bouncing off walls, spreading rumors about her covert unit and her prowess. None of them fully understood her, yet all instinctively recognized that she was untouchable. As Jenna moved to find a seat, she noticed subtle glances and small, calculated shifts in posture around her. Marines who had been loud and brash the day before now hesitated to meet her gaze. Her presence commanded attention without demanding it, a paradox of authority and subtle intimidation. She did not need to assert dominance, it radiated naturally, like gravity. Suddenly, the Marine who had previously struck her tried to reclaim some semblance of authority. Rising from his seat, he strode toward her with a forced smile, trying to mask his tension with bravado. "Hey, Cross," he said, voice overly loud. "Maybe we should start over, huh?" Jenna stopped, her movements deliberate. Her eyes met his, icy and unwavering. A silence fell over the hall as her gaze anchored him in place. Every muscle in her body was poised, ready, a predator contained only by discipline. "We don't need to start over," she said softly, the words carrying a quiet, dangerous weight. "I suggest you remember your place." The hall seemed to shrink around them. Conversations died mid-sentence, and even the servers paused in their tasks. Whispers rippled like a current through the tables. Did she just intimidate him without raising her voice? The Marine faltered, unsure if he should respond, retreat, or risk further embarrassment. He took a hesitant step back, swallowing, and the realization hit him fully. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Jenna continued to her seat as if nothing had happened, fluid and composed. Yet beneath the calm exterior, her mind catalogued everything. Positions of tables, the stance of Marines, the angles of approach, even the way sunlight glinted off the trays. Every detail mattered. Every movement could be leveraged should circumstances require it. She was always in control, and the mess hall, once a place of mundane routine, had become a stage of silent, unspoken tension. After breakfast, the morning drills commenced. Today's schedule involved live-fire exercises at the weapons range, tactical movement across rough terrain, and decision-making under pressure. Jenna's team was assigned a simulated mission: infiltrate a mock urban stronghold, neutralize threats, and secure a high-value objective. For her, the exercise was routine. For her teammates, and particularly the Marine who had struck her, it was a lesson in observation, discipline, and precision. As the simulation began, Jenna's movements were flawless. She directed her team with subtle gestures, guiding their positioning, timing, and approach without overt instruction. Each motion was precise, executed with quiet authority. The Marine who had struck her struggled to keep pace. He stumbled over obstacles, misjudged angles, and second-guessed decisions that, in any other scenario, would have been instinctual. Jenna's efficiency only heightened his anxiety. Halfway through the exercise, an unexpected variable was introduced: a simulated ambush from an unseen flank. The instructors watched closely, evaluating the team's responses. Jenna's team reacted instantly, covering angles, neutralizing threats, and communicating silently through gestures and eye contact. Her team moved as one, anticipating her commands without words. The Marine tried to mimic her approach but hesitated, faltered, and nearly jeopardized the simulation. Each misstep was a stark reminder that he had underestimated her, and underestimated the consequences of doing so. After the drill, the teams gathered to review performance. Instructors praised efficiency, teamwork, and decisiveness. Jenna received a quiet nod of acknowledgement but no fanfare. Her recognition was subtle, the kind reserved for those who already understood her capabilities. The Marine who had shoved her avoided her gaze entirely, the weight of yesterday's incident now compounded by today's demonstration of her skill. Fear, respect, and curiosity intertwined within him, leaving him uneasy, uncertain. Later in the barracks, Jenna went through her personal debrief routine. She meticulously reviewed every decision, every movement, and every interaction from the day. Her training demanded reflection, adaptation, and relentless self-awareness. Even a minor mistake, overlooked in a mundane moment, could have catastrophic consequences in her world. She wasn't just a Marine. She was a soldier trained for missions where lives depended on precision, speed, and calculated risk. Meanwhile, the Marine who had struck her replayed the events in his mind. Each memory of the mess hall, the obstacle course, and the tactical simulation blended into a growing realization. He had brushed against someone far beyond his understanding. The whispers of her secret unit now felt real, the possibility of her capabilities looming like a shadow over his every thought. He couldn't challenge her, couldn't predict her, and couldn't ignore the tension that had been established. By evening, the base had settled into a quiet rhythm. Jenna took a solitary walk along the perimeter, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, painting the training grounds in golden light. The shadows stretched long and dark, mirroring the quiet power she carried. Each day, each exercise, each interaction reinforced the lesson that strength was not always loud and skill was not always visible. The Marine who had struck her had learned this lesson. The base, in subtle ways, was beginning to understand it too. A shadow fell across her path. She turned slightly, recognizing Captain Langford approaching with measured steps. His expression was neutral but observant, eyes tracing her movements, nodding posture, composure, and presence. "Cross," he said quietly, "I hear you've been making waves today. Any reports I should be aware of?" Jenna's gaze held his for a moment, unwavering. "Nothing outside of routine training, sir. The day went as expected." Her tone was calm, even polite, but beneath it lay the unspoken weight of competence, control, and lethal capability. Langford nodded slowly, as if acknowledging an understanding he could not fully articulate. Some things, he knew, were better left unspoken. Night fell and the barracks grew quiet. The Marine who had shoved her earlier lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Anxiety, respect, and fear battled within him. He replayed every glance, every movement, every silent demonstration of authority Jenna had displayed. By now, he knew without question, he had underestimated a storm in human form. His miscalculation had shifted something fundamental in his perception of the world around him. Jenna, on the other hand, lay on her bunk, eyes open but calm, reflecting on the day. She allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. No weapons had been drawn. No blows had been exchanged. Yet the lesson had been delivered with precision. In her world, influence, control, and presence could be as powerful as any rifle, any explosive, any combat maneuver. And the Marine who had struck her in the mess hall would carry that lesson forever. Outside, the base was quiet, the stars beginning to pierce the dark sky. Jenna stood at the edge of the training grounds one last time, surveying the ground she had traversed countless times. Her mind cataloged every detail, every interaction, every variable. The storm had been contained, yet simmered beneath the surface. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new exercises, new Marines eager to test their strength against hers. And once again, she would move through it all with silent, lethal control. The Marine who had struck her would think twice before underestimating anyone again. And the base, though unaware of the full extent of her abilities, would begin to feel the quiet presence of someone extraordinary among ordinary soldiers. Jenna's secret remained intact, her power hidden in plain sight. Yet each day, each interaction, and each silent lesson reinforced her role, a force beyond ordinary comprehension, capable of controlling events, people, and outcomes without the need for overt confrontation. The ripples of her presence would spread, far beyond the mess hall, far beyond today's drills, shaping the perceptions and actions of those who encountered her. And somewhere in the shadows, a quiet suspense lingered. The Marine who had struck her, and anyone else foolish enough to test her, would one day discover the full extent of what they had provoked, and it would be far more than a lesson in humility. It would be a revelation of controlled, disciplined power that few could survive unscathed. The following morning arrived thick with fog, the chill biting at exposed skin and leaving the training grounds cloaked in muted gray. Even the sun struggled to pierce the mist, casting long, distorted shadows over the rows of concrete and metal structures. The base hummed quietly with activity, Marines moving in formation, boots crunching against gravel, the low murmur of officers planning the day's exercises. But beneath the surface, a tension lingered like static electricity, invisible yet palpable. Jenna Cross moved among it all with the precision of someone who had mastered both observation and control. Every glance, every step, every subtle shift in her weight communicated a quiet authority. The events of the mess hall and the previous day's drills had become more than mere anecdotes. They were quietly woven into the collective consciousness of the base. Whispers of Jenna's secret capabilities had spread, some factual, some exaggerated, but all conveyed a single truth. She was not a Marine to be underestimated. The brash Marine who had shoved her the day before kept his distance, his usual swagger replaced by hesitant, tentative movements. Even when speaking to fellow recruits, his sentences faltered, interrupted by the unspoken knowledge that Jenna was watching, always aware, always poised. Training today focused on advanced tactical maneuvers. Teams were split into squads to simulate real combat scenarios, combining stealth, agility, and strategic decision-making under pressure. Jenna's squad moved as a single, cohesive unit, executing each task with precision. She guided them subtly, silently, through gestures, nods, and the occasional whisper. Her movements were fluid, every decision calculated. She didn't need to shout commands. Her team responded instinctively. Every drill, every step, and every reaction was a testament to her unmatched training. Meanwhile, the Marine who had struck her in the mess hall struggled to maintain composure. Each time he glanced at her, he felt a ripple of unease. He had seen her move, observed her skill, and yet had no understanding of its full depth. His attempts to anticipate her movements during drills failed repeatedly. He realized that while physical strength mattered, it was nothing compared to the control and mastery Jenna exuded. His confidence eroded incrementally, replaced by an awareness that he had not only underestimated her, but had invited a lesson he might never forget. The squad approached a section of the grounds designed for simulated urban warfare. Metal containers and mock buildings created narrow corridors, tight corners, and complex vantage points. The exercise required swift assessment of threats, precision movement, and flawless execution under simulated enemy fire. Jenna led her team through the terrain with a quiet, authoritative presence. Her eyes constantly scanned the environment, noting angles, possible cover, and movement patterns of both her team and the opposing squad. Every instruction she offered was subtle but decisive, leaving no room for hesitation. The Marine from the mess hall followed behind, attempting to mirror her tactics, but each attempt faltered. He hesitated at corners, misjudged distances, and struggled to maintain situational awareness. Jenna's subtle nods, shifts in stance, and silent commands kept her team synchronized while exposing the other Marines' lack of preparedness. By the end of the exercise, it was clear who commanded not only skill but also psychological dominance. The contrast between Jenna's composed precision and the Marines' reactive uncertainty could not have been more pronounced. After the exercise, the teams regrouped for debriefing. Instructors noted the efficiency and coordination of Jenna's squad. Their performance was near flawless, executed with an almost imperceptible synchronization that suggested years of experience, not just a few months of training. Jenna received a quiet acknowledgement from the lead instructor, a subtle nod of approval that spoke volumes. No words were needed. Everyone understood the message. She was exceptional, far beyond the ordinary scope of expectation. Meanwhile, whispers continued to spread through the base. Marines speculated about her past assignments, her elite unit, and the possibilities of her real capabilities. Rumors of covert missions and top-secret operations circulated like wildfire. Even those who had never seen her in action spoke with hushed reverence about the way she carried herself, the invisible authority she exerted, and the quiet power she commanded. By now she was not merely a Marine. She was a presence, a force that could not be ignored. In the barracks later, the Marine who had shoved her spent hours replaying the previous 2 days in his mind. He remembered the mess hall, the obstacle course, and the tactical exercises. Each scenario reinforced a single truth: he had underestimated her. Every instinct he had relied upon was inadequate. Every assumption he had made was flawed. Fear and respect now intertwined within him, leaving him uncertain and cautious. He could not predict her, could not anticipate her, and could not challenge her without consequence. Jenna, on her bunk, allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Her life had always been a balance of visible and invisible forces. Every mission, every training session, every interaction demanded awareness, precision, and discipline. The mess hall incident was trivial compared to what she had faced in classified operations, yet it exemplified the same principle. Power is often invisible, and the perception of weakness can be fatal. In a place where appearances deceived, she had demonstrated control without revealing the full extent of her skill. Later, during a quiet evening stroll around the base, Jenna observed the shadows stretching long across the grounds. The training fields, empty and still, seemed almost serene. Yet she knew the quiet was deceptive. Just as the Marine who had struck her would carry the memory of her presence, so too would others begin to sense her influence. Her skill, her control, and her psychological dominance had subtly shifted the dynamics of the base, though no one could quantify it. She was both a part of this world and apart from it, an unseen force shaping events without overt action. A soft sound behind her drew her attention. Captain Langford emerged from the shadows, steps deliberate and measured. "Cross," he said, voice low, "your performance over the past 2 days has been notable. I don't usually interfere, but I wanted to speak privately." Jenna's gaze met his, unflinching, calm, and calculated. "Noted, sir," she replied, the faintest edge of steel threading her tone. Langford studied her for a long moment, weighing words and actions before nodding slowly. Some things, he knew, were better left unspoken. Back in the barracks, the Marine who had shoved her finally understood the full scope of his misjudgment. The quiet, methodical way she moved, the way she commanded attention without assertion, and the subtle psychological dominance she wielded were unlike anything he had encountered. He could not compete with her, not with his brute force, not with his confidence, and certainly not with his arrogance. Each thought reinforced a growing respect, and a lingering unease that he could not shake. Jenna prepared for bed with the same meticulous attention she applied to all tasks. Gear inspected, weapons cleaned, tactical notes reviewed. She reflected on the lessons of the day: observation, anticipation, precision, and control. Every interaction, no matter how minor, carried significance. Even the Marine who had struck her in the mess hall had been transformed, not physically, not visibly, but in awareness. He had learned, without injury or confrontation, the subtle weight of her presence and skill. As she lay down, she allowed herself a faint smile. The storm she carried was invisible to most, yet its effects rippled through the base like a silent tide. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new exercises, and potentially new conflicts. But she was ready. Her mind was alert, her body prepared, and her presence unassailable. Those who had underestimated her would continue to learn, slowly and quietly, that power could exist without display, and skill could dominate without a single overt action. And somewhere, in the quiet darkness of the barracks, the Marine who had struck her silently vowed never to underestimate anyone again. He had glimpsed only a fraction of her true capabilities, and it was enough to leave an indelible mark on his perception, a mark that would shape his actions, his decisions, and his respect in the days to come. The base, shrouded in night, was unaware of the quiet shift in its dynamics. Yet Jenna Cross moved through it with the knowledge that her presence had been felt, her lessons delivered, and her influence subtly but irrevocably established. The ripples of yesterday, today, and the mess hall incident would continue to spread, and those who dared to challenge her would encounter a force far greater than they could anticipate. And as the stars pierced the night sky over the base, she remained vigilant, calm, and untouchable. For Jenna, every day, every interaction, every silent confrontation was part of a larger design, a life lived in balance between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between visibility and secrecy, between respect and fear. The storm she carried was quiet, invisible, and lethal, and the Marine who had struck her in the mess hall would never forget it. The morning fog had barely lifted when the base's alarm systems blared through the still chill air. A training alert had been triggered, simulating an enemy incursion on the perimeter. While most Marines saw it as just another drill, Jenna Cross knew differently. Every alarm, every sudden disruption was a test of readiness, awareness, and instinct. Her pulse remained steady, her breathing calm. To her, these situations were not chaos. They were practice for the life she had led in secret operations, where seconds could mean the difference between success and death. Marines scrambled to assign positions, their movements hurried, calculated, but lacking the refined precision of someone trained for real combat. The brash Marine who had struck Jenna in the mess hall froze momentarily, scanning the horizon. He tried to maintain composure, but the tension from previous days clung to him like a second skin. Today, he would experience firsthand the difference between ordinary training and the presence of someone who had mastered the extraordinary. Jenna moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the perimeter with meticulous focus. She assessed each approach, noting cover, angles, and possible ambush points. Her team followed seamlessly, responding to subtle gestures and silent commands. Where others relied on loud orders or forceful instruction, Jenna's authority was invisible yet undeniable. Even without raising her voice, she guided her squad through the chaos with absolute precision. The alarm simulation escalated as a secondary threat was introduced, simulated enemy units attempting to breach the perimeter from multiple directions. The Marine who had struck her watched Jenna maneuver her team with a calm, deadly efficiency. She led them through complex paths, covering angles he hadn't even considered. Her awareness extended beyond the visible threats, predicting movements, anticipating reactions, and mitigating danger before it materialized. Each decision was executed flawlessly, her team moving as an extension of her own instincts. During a simulated breach in the northern sector, Jenna's instincts sharpened further. She identified a weak point in the perimeter that the opposing team would likely exploit. Without hesitation, she moved to intercept, signaling her team silently. They responded immediately, cutting off the simulated threat with calculated precision. The Marine who had struck her tried to replicate her actions, but every misstep revealed his limitations. He realized that raw strength, courage, or confidence could not match the combination of experience, awareness, and instinct she displayed. By mid-morning, the instructors conducting the drill began to notice anomalies. Jenna's team executed maneuvers that far exceeded standard expectations. Movements were precise, reactions swift, and coordination flawless. The simulation's outcomes began to favor her team overwhelmingly, exposing flaws in the traditional methods other Marines had been trained to follow. Whispers traveled along the lines. Who is she really? Where did she learn to move like that? The mystery of her background only deepened the tension. After successfully neutralizing the simulated threat, Jenna regrouped her team. Her composure remained unshakable. She allowed no trace of fatigue or excitement to surface. She debriefed her team quietly, offering minimal but precise feedback. Every correction was calculated, every suggestion intentional. Her focus was not on accolades but on perfection, on ensuring her team internalized lessons that could be applied in any scenario, whether simulated or real. Meanwhile, the Marine who had shoved her in the mess hall retreated to a quieter corner of the field, replaying the exercise in his mind. Every hesitation he had exhibited, every miscalculation, reinforced the realization that he was outclassed. He had not only underestimated Jenna, but had failed to recognize the depth of her training and experience. Fear, respect, and awe tangled together, leaving him uncertain how to act in her presence without risking humiliation, or worse. The day intensified further when an unexpected challenge was introduced, a high-intensity urban simulation involving hostages. The objective was clear: infiltrate the building, neutralize threats, and extract non-combatants without injury. For most Marines, it was an extreme test of coordination and judgment. For Jenna, it was routine. Her mind cataloged every entry point, every window, every possible angle of attack. She briefed her team quietly, her voice steady, precise, and commanding in its subtlety. The Marine who had struck her followed behind, desperate to keep pace. Each movement she made was flawless, instinctive, and calculated. Every room she entered, every corner she rounded, she anticipated threats before they appeared. Her team mirrored her actions seamlessly, executing maneuvers she had signaled with barely perceptible gestures. When she approached the simulated hostages, her focus sharpened. Timing, patience, and restraint were paramount, and she executed each step with surgical precision. By the end of the simulation, her team had achieved objectives faster, cleaner, and more efficiently than any other squad that day. The instructors conferred quietly, clearly impressed but careful not to overtly acknowledge the extraordinary performance. Rumors about her unit and secret training began to solidify in the minds of the observers. Jenna's reputation had grown exponentially, though no one outside her unit understood the depth of what they had just witnessed. That evening, as the base quieted and lights dimmed, Jenna returned to her bunk. She methodically reviewed the day, noting improvements, anticipating potential challenges, and ensuring her team was prepared for anything. Her movements were precise, disciplined, and unhurried. This was the life she knew: constant assessment, continuous refinement, and total control over the environment. The Marine who had struck her lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day had left him shaken, though he struggled to articulate why. Every memory, from the mess hall to the obstacle course, and now the urban simulation, demonstrated her superiority in skill, awareness, and psychological dominance. His mind wrestled with a quiet dread. He had brushed against someone capable of controlling not just a scenario but the perception, reaction, and behavior of everyone around her. Jenna's presence, quiet yet commanding, had altered the balance of authority on the base. Her interactions, though often subtle, had left indelible marks. The Marine who had struck her would never again move without caution, never underestimate anyone, and certainly never disregard the potential of someone like her. Outside, the base lay shrouded in darkness. Stars dotted the night sky as Jenna walked the perimeter once more, cataloging everything with a practiced eye. The fog of early morning had lifted, but the metaphorical fog of secrecy and hidden power lingered. Those who had witnessed her capabilities, directly or indirectly, carried unspoken awareness, curiosity, and a measure of apprehension. Captain Langford found her standing there, observing the grounds with her usual poise. "Cross," he said quietly, "I want a full report on today's exercises. Not just your team's performance, but observations on the other squads." Jenna's gaze met his, unflinching and calm. "Understood, sir," she replied. Her tone was neutral, but the unspoken knowledge beneath it was clear. She had already analyzed every detail, cataloged every variable, and noted every deviation from expected behavior. Later, as the base fell into an uneasy quiet, Jenna lay in her bunk, reflecting on the day. She allowed herself a moment of internal satisfaction, not from ego, but from the assurance that her team had performed perfectly under her guidance. Every motion, every decision, and every subtle demonstration of control had reinforced the lesson. She was not to be underestimated. And somewhere in the shadows, the Marine who had struck her in the mess hall would continue to replay the events, a quiet knot of fear and respect forming in his mind. He had encountered only a fraction of her skill, and it had been enough to leave an indelible mark. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new exercises, and potentially new opportunities for confrontation. But Jenna Cross would be ready, always ready. The storm she carried remained invisible to most, yet its effects were spreading quietly across the base. Whispers would turn to stories, caution would turn to respect, and those who sought to test her resolve would learn, eventually, that power often exists in silence, skill often remains hidden, and underestimating a shadow could be fatal. The base woke to an unusual tension that morning. There was no mist, no fog, just a heavy, anticipatory stillness that seemed to vibrate through the concrete and metal of the training grounds. Rumors had already begun to circulate. A security breach simulation, unannounced, involving higher command. For most Marines, it would be another exercise, another test. But Jenna Cross knew better. In her world, nothing was ever ordinary. Every drill, every alarm, and every challenge was a potential rehearsal for real danger. A lesson in discipline, awareness, and controlled chaos. Her team assembled quickly, moving with the efficiency that had become their trademark under her guidance. Every motion, from adjusting their gear to scanning the perimeter, was precise. Her eyes flicked across every detail, the positions of the officers, the spacing of the obstacles, the subtle reactions of the Marines around her. Even those who were unaware of her true abilities instinctively stepped aside, their movements careful, respectful, and cautious. The Marine who had struck her in the mess hall arrived late, his usual arrogance replaced by a thin veneer of forced confidence. He glanced at her from across the yard, trying to mask his unease with a nod that trembled just slightly. His friends noticed but said nothing. The subtle tension was too palpable, too heavy to ignore. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't just facing a skilled Marine. He was facing a force that could dominate through presence, anticipation, and silent authority. The instructors briefed the teams. A simulated high-value target operation, requiring stealth, tactical decision-making, and rapid neutralization of threats. The simulation would take place across multiple sectors, with obstacles, confined spaces, and unpredictable variables. Jenna listened, analyzing each detail, committing every nuance to memory. Her mind raced through contingencies, escape routes, and tactical advantages, as if she were conducting a real-life mission rather than a training exercise. The exercise began and her team moved through the scenario like clockwork. Every step was deliberate, every reaction calculated. She guided them through hallways and narrow corridors, signaling threats, pointing out angles, and adjusting tactics without speaking above a whisper. Even minor adjustments, a slight shift in stance, a tilt of her head, a hand gesture, were enough to synchronize her team perfectly. The Marine who had struck her struggled to keep pace. Every misstep, hesitation, and miscalculation drew the attention of his peers. Jenna's calm dominance became an unspoken measuring stick. He realized that no matter his strength or confidence, he was operating on a different level. His chest tightened with a mixture of awe and anxiety. He could see her skill, could feel her influence on the scenario, but could not begin to comprehend the depth of her training. Midway through the simulation, an unexpected variable was introduced, an injured civilian hidden in one of the buildings. The team was tasked with extraction while maintaining operational control. Jenna's instincts sharpened instantly. She assessed every exit, calculated threat angles, and positioned her team to cover all contingencies. Her movements were fluid, precise, and almost imperceptibly swift. She didn't shout commands. She only adjusted her posture and gestures, and her team responded instinctively. The Marine who had struck her panicked slightly when encountering a simulated obstacle. He hesitated, unsure which path to take, while Jenna's team navigated flawlessly. Her influence on the environment was quiet but absolute. Every step she took was mirrored by her team, while his missteps amplified the tension around him. By the time the civilian was rescued, Jenna's team had secured the sector completely. Their efficiency was unmatched, and it was obvious even to the instructors that the outcome had been dictated by her guidance. After the exercise, debriefing revealed a subtle shift in base dynamics. Whispers swirled about Jenna's mysterious capabilities. While no one fully understood her background, everyone recognized the effectiveness of her leadership and the quiet authority she wielded. Even seasoned officers who had observed the scenario were cautious in their praise, careful not to acknowledge the extraordinary skill she displayed openly. Rumors of her secret special operations unit circulated once again, growing with each retelling, each whisper, each curious glance. Meanwhile, the Marine who had struck her in the mess hall retreated to a quiet corner, replaying every detail of the day in his mind. Anxiety, respect, and fear wove together into a tight knot in his chest. He realized that Jenna was not just a skilled Marine. She was an unpredictable force capable of controlling outcomes and perceptions simultaneously. He had seen only a fraction of her skill, yet it was enough to instill a lasting impression. She could dominate in ways he could not anticipate, predict, or counteract. That evening, Jenna returned to the barracks, her mind already moving through contingencies for tomorrow. Even in rest, her awareness remained sharp. Every noise, every shadow, every movement was noted. Her training had conditioned her to anticipate variables, to prepare for the unexpected, and to maintain complete control over herself and her surroundings. The storm she carried was invisible, silent, yet undeniably present, and she relished the quiet assurance that her team, and even the Marine who had challenged her, would remember her influence long after the day ended. As darkness fell over the base, an unexpected communication crackled over the radio, a real-world alert. One of the training sectors reported unauthorized movement near a sensitive area of the base. Officers scrambled, sending patrols to investigate. Jenna's pulse quickened not from fear but from instinct. Her training, honed in classified operations, kicked in immediately. She knew that this was no simulation. Someone or something had breached the perimeter. The tension she had maintained in drills and exercises now translated into a real test of skill, awareness, and readiness. She moved with deliberate calm, assembling her team quickly. Instructions were precise, minimal, and executed flawlessly. Every member of her squad knew her style, responding instinctively. The Marine who had struck her in the mess hall followed at a cautious distance, unsure of his role but aware that Jenna's decisions would dictate the outcome. He understood, finally, that this was no ordinary exercise and that underestimating her could have real consequences. The squad moved through the sector, clearing buildings and securing paths. Every corner, every shadow, every potential threat was scrutinized. Jenna's eyes caught a subtle movement, almost imperceptible to anyone else, a reflection from a window that suggested the presence of someone attempting to evade patrols. Without hesitation, she adjusted her team's positioning, silently directing them to intercept while maintaining the integrity of the operation. By the time the breach was neutralized, the source had been contained with minimal disruption, thanks almost entirely to Jenna's decisive assessment and flawless execution. Command officers were stunned. Reports later would describe the efficiency of the squad, but only a few knew why it had been so effective. It was the invisible, calculated presence of a Marine who had mastered both skill and psychological dominance. That night, Jenna returned to her bunk, fatigue settling into her muscles, yet her mind remained alert. The events of the day, the simulations, the Marine's miscalculations, and the unexpected real-world alert had reaffirmed a truth she already knew. Her influence extended far beyond simple drills, rumors, or whispered speculation. She was a force whose control was absolute when necessary and invisible until revealed. The Marine who had struck her earlier would now carry more than just respect and fear. He carried awareness. Awareness of skill, precision, and a silent authority he could neither predict nor challenge. He would think twice before acting rashly, before misjudging anyone, and before underestimating the quiet force that was Jenna Cross. And outside, as the base lights dimmed and shadows stretched long across the training grounds, Jenna walked the perimeter one last time. Every sound, every silhouette, every whisper of movement was catalogued. The storm she carried was quiet, invisible, and deadly, and the day's events had reminded everyone, even those who did not know her secret, of its presence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new scenarios, and new opportunities for testing skill, control, and influence. But Jenna Cross would be ready as always. Calm, precise, lethal, unseen yet undeniable. And for the Marine who had struck her in the mess hall as well as everyone else on the base, the lesson was clear. Underestimate her, and the consequences would extend far beyond bruised ego or spilled food. The storm she carried had already begun to shape the base in subtle ways. Her influence was no longer confined to whispers or observation. It was manifesting in behavior, decisions, and caution. And somewhere beneath the quiet night sky, that presence remained unchallenged, unstoppable, and silent, waiting for the next moment when skill, instinct, and control would become inevitable. The dawn was pale and cold over Camp Pendleton, the mist curling like silent tendrils along the training grounds. Today was different. A sense of anticipation hung in the air, heavier than any drill or simulated breach. Rumors had spread like wildfire overnight. The brash Marine who had struck Jenna in the mess hall had reported her abilities, embellishing details with every retelling, and whispers had reached the ears of higher command. By now, everyone knew, or at least suspected, that she was extraordinary. But no one knew the full extent. Jenna Cross emerged from her barracks with measured steps. Her team followed silently, their movements precise and synchronized, each Marine attuned to the subtle cues she had trained them to read. The brash Marine trailed behind, tense and uneasy, every movement betraying his anxiety. He avoided her gaze, but his thoughts were filled with the events of the past week. The mess hall confrontation, the obstacle courses, the tactical simulations, and the unexpected real-world alert. He knew with stark clarity that underestimating Jenna was no longer an option. The commanding officer, Colonel Harding, addressed the assembled squads. Today's exercise would combine all previous training elements: live tactical simulations, urban combat, hostage rescue, and high-risk infiltration. The order was clear. Squads were to demonstrate teamwork, strategy, and adaptability under extreme conditions. For most Marines, it would be a test. For Jenna, it was another opportunity to merge observation, instinct, and control into flawless execution. As the exercise began, her team moved with near-perfect coordination. Every building, every alley, every cover point was accounted for. Jenna guided them silently, her gestures minimal yet precise, her eyes scanning for the smallest irregularities. The brash Marine followed, faltering at every corner, struggling to maintain composure. Every glance at her reminded him of his misjudgment, every hesitation a stark contrast to her flawless execution. He was painfully aware that he was no longer operating on equal ground. The first challenge, a simulated hostage extraction. The scenario required infiltrating a building filled with concealed hostiles, neutralizing threats, and safely securing the hostages. Jenna approached with calculated patience, analyzing each entry point, each potential angle of attack. Her team moved like extensions of her own body, anticipating her every signal. When she entered the building, every Marine instinctively covered the angles she had already identified, securing the area before a single threat could emerge. The brash Marine stumbled as he entered behind her, nearly colliding with one of her team members. Panic flashed in his eyes, quickly masked by forced confidence. He realized that no amount of physical strength or bravado could compensate for what Jenna possessed: situational awareness, silent authority, and the ability to anticipate the unpredictable. Every corner he rounded, every door he opened, reinforced a growing, unavoidable truth. She was not just skilled, she was exceptional in ways he could barely comprehend. The exercise intensified as a simulated double threat appeared: an approaching enemy squad from the rear and a secondary hostage hidden on an upper floor. Jenna's mind processed the situation instantly. She split her team with precision, assigning positions with gestures so subtle that no one outside her unit would notice. Each Marine moved seamlessly, executing tasks with flawless timing. She intercepted the rear threat herself, neutralizing the simulated attackers with speed and accuracy that left instructors wide-eyed. The secondary hostage was secured without error, all actions perfectly timed, executed, and controlled. Colonel Harding observed from a distance, his brow furrowed with both curiosity and incredulity. He had seen many high-performing Marines, but Jenna's coordination, anticipation, and subtle authority were unmatched. Her squad performed flawlessly not because of brute force but because of invisible influence, controlled movement, and precision guidance. Even the Marine who had struck her in the mess hall, watching from the sidelines, could not deny the mastery he witnessed. The final test of the exercise involved extraction under duress, navigating a narrow corridor filled with simulated explosives and multiple ambush points. Jenna led with calm authority, her team moving as extensions of her will. The brash Marine hesitated, misjudging distances, stepping too close to simulated hazards. A minor error, but enough to trigger subtle adjustments from Jenna's team to compensate. She didn't speak. She didn't shout. She merely shifted her stance, signaled with a glance, and the team corrected course instantly. He watched, transfixed and humbled, as she orchestrated success without a single overt command. By the end of the exercise, Jenna's team had completed objectives faster, cleaner, and with precision that made the event look effortless. Colonel Harding called all squads together for debriefing. He looked directly at Jenna, his expression a mixture of admiration and cautious respect. "Cross," he said, voice steady, "your team's performance today exceeded every expectation. I need a full report on tactics, coordination, and execution." Jenna nodded subtly, her calm composure unwavering. "Understood, sir," she replied. Her words were measured, controlled, and yet they carried a quiet authority that left no doubt in anyone's mind that she was the center of today's success. The brash Marine stood quietly at the edge of the formation, staring at her with a mix of awe, fear, and reluctant respect. He finally understood what he had underestimated. His actions in the mess hall, meant as dominance, had been trivial compared to the silent, controlled mastery Jenna wielded effortlessly. He could no longer act without caution, no longer move without anticipating consequences, no longer underestimate anyone, especially her. After the debriefing, the base slowly returned to normal, but the impact of today's exercise lingered. Whispers about her abilities spread further, stories of her secret unit gaining traction with each retelling. She was no longer just a Marine. She was a presence, a symbol of silent power and unparalleled skill. Everyone who had observed her, even indirectly, was left with an unshakable awareness that she was extraordinary. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the training grounds, Jenna walked alone to the edge of the base. Her reflection in the still water of a nearby pond seemed almost surreal, calm, precise, and untouchable. She allowed herself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction. The exercise had confirmed what she already knew. Skill, discipline, and control were far more powerful than arrogance or brute strength. The Marine who had struck her in the mess hall had learned this lesson, painfully but permanently. As she gazed out over the base, Captain Langford approached quietly. "Cross," he said, tone measured, "your performance today has been remarkable. Command wants you to consider mentoring others. There's potential here beyond normal assignments." Jenna turned, her expression neutral but her mind sharp. "I understand, sir," she replied. Mentorship would be another exercise in influence, another opportunity to guide without overt command. It was a subtle extension of the control she had always wielded. Later in the barracks, the brash Marine finally approached her. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by humility and trepidation. "Cross," he began, voice low, I wanted to apologize. I underestimated you. I see now how wrong I was." Jenna's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. She inclined her head slightly, a silent acknowledgement. No words were necessary. The lesson had been delivered through observation, experience, and controlled mastery, and he understood it fully. Outside, the base lay quiet under the stars. Jenna walked the perimeter one last time, her mind cataloging every movement, every interaction, every nuance of the day. The storm she carried was invisible, yet undeniable. Her influence had reshaped perception, altered behavior, and established an authority that was both quiet and absolute. Those who had challenged her, tested her, or misjudged her now knew the truth. She was not just a Marine. She was a force, precise, controlled, and lethal in its subtlety. The final lesson of the week was clear. Underestimate her and you would learn too late. Arrogance, misjudgment, and haste were powerless against skill, awareness, and silent authority. The Marine who had struck her in the mess hall, like so many others, had learned this lesson. He would carry it quietly, humbly, and with permanent respect. And Jenna Cross, standing alone beneath the night sky, allowed herself the faintest of smiles. She had turned every misjudgment, every challenge, and every threat into proof of her mastery. The base, the Marines, and even the officer corps had learned a critical truth that could not be taught in a manual, drilled in exercises, or whispered in rumors. Jenna's presence, skill, and authority were now undeniable. Tomorrow would bring new drills, new exercises, and new challenges. But the storm she carried, quiet and invisible, would remain. It would shape perception, demand respect, and command attention without a single overt act. And for the Marine who had struck her, and anyone else foolish enough to underestimate her, the consequences would be etched in memory forever. Because Jenna Cross was not merely a Marine. She was the embodiment of precision, control, and silent power. And no one, not a single Marine, officer, or recruit, would forget it.